Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm Justin, and tonight we are going to discuss 1996's Head Above Water. Directed by Jim Wilson and starring Cameron Diaz, Harvey Keitel, Craig Sheffer, and Billy Zane. Nathalie and George are a newlywed couple spending the summer at an island beach house in Maine. Unfortunately, Nathalie's troubled past resurfaces in the form of her ex-lover Kent, and an unfortunate incident will test the trust between the newlyweds. Before long, Nathalie's recently centered life begins to spiral out of control. Head Above Water is for the horror fan that enjoys a dark comedy thriller with lots of twists and turns. Also joining me tonight is my wonderful co-host, Zena Dixon. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm Justin, and with me, as always, is the wonderful, giving, caring, talented, and amazing real queen of horror, Zena Dixon. How you doing tonight, Zena?
I'm doing well. Thank you for that intro. Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm doing well. I meant every word, and I'm so excited. Now, tonight's movie is technically not a horror movie. I'm aware of that, everybody, but it does have a lot of thrills, suspense, definitely leans on the comedic elements. But we're going to be talking about Head Above Water. Now, yes, and this movie I first watched when I was a teenager on either late night HBO or Cinemax. Now, Head Above Water is definitely more of a dark comedy rather than a horror film, but I really do think it hits the check marks of like suspense and thriller. And I know we enjoy comedic horror films out there, even in unintentional ones like Scream for Help. So I thought that this would be a fun one to discuss and to cover because I think Head Above Water has a really wicked sense of humor,
Mhm.
especially once the events of the movie start to spiral out of control for the main characters. It's quirky at times, suspenseful at times, shocking, but then you're kind of laughing in the same moment, and often all of this kind of happening in one single scene. And I love it because it's an early Cameron Diaz performance. And I think you
Yeah.
can easily see how she would soon become the star that she became. Always easy to say in hindsight, but I mean, I think it's pretty clear anybody watching this time was going to, see more of her, which this is needed to have all the men in this film fawning over her in one way or another. So I do believe that this is a remake of a Dutch film, but I've never seen the original. And it wasn't until like literally like yesterday, I think I was looking things up about this, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even know it was a remake. But I will
Oh.
say that so far, everyone that I have shown this to, shown Head Above Water to, like for movie nights, etc., really, really has enjoyed it. They find the humor in it, but I noticed that they really do get caught up in the like suspense of Nathalie trying to get through one mishap after another. It just keeps escalating. The rest of the cast is solid. You have Harvey Keitel, who I think pretty much always elevates like every character he plays, whether he's front and center or in the background. Like I recently rewatched Point of No Return, and he's in that for just a small amount of time, but he's so like chilling in that in this little tiny quiet performance. So even though he's not in that much at all, he still has a huge presence. And as George in this, it is definitely one of his upfront normal performances. And yes, he still needs to go to some very dark places, and Keitel does that very well. I always thought Billy Zane was one of the most charming actors out of the 90s. Even in like Titanic as Cal, he still has this smarmy charm. And you can believe instantly that he and Nathalie were once together and a hot past and a hot mess past. But Craig Sheffer also is an interesting actor in here. I always think of him instantly from Some Kind of Wonderful, which is my favorite of all the John Hughes era films. It wasn't directed by John, but it was written by him. And in that one, Craig Sheffer is one of the best high school jerks of all time. And in
Mhm.
this, he does find a sweet quality, but there's also something under the surface that's like always hard to trust about him, which
Mhm.
is perfect for his character. And you need that with actually all the characters of this film for Nathalie, this element that they all have this like side they display in public and another side in private. And overall, for the non-spoiler part of this review, I love Head Above Water. The first time I saw it, I loved it. And when I was a teen, I probably watched it a dozen times. Then it had been many, many years. And I finally got it on DVD. and I thought it held up very well. I still was just as much invested in it. It's clever, smart. It definitely does not shy away from the dark comedy elements, but it also does a really terrific job at having you like the characters enough that you want to see how this suspenseful premise will turn out as it just gets crazier and crazier. And it's not like crazy over the top horror, and it's not a terrifying suspense film, but it straddles somewhere in the middle of all that. And I think it's just a really, really fun movie showing characters and situations where they just get deeper and deeper into trouble. But Zena, I've been waiting to hear, what did you think about Head Above Water?
Well, first, you explained it so well, and I have so much stuff to say. I should have wrote it down. Okay, first, Some Kind of Wonderful is one of my absolute favorite movies.
Oh,
I love that
nice.
movie so much, and
Yes.
Craig Sheffer, he's always playing a jerk. There's another movie I love where he's a jerk a lot, but one of my other favorite movies is Ritual, and he's in
Hmm.
that. Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah, so it's like a Tales from the Crypt,
Hmm.
movie, like their movies when they used to do those back in the day. And yeah, it's about this doctor. I'm so sorry, don't be upset, but the woman from Dirty Dancing, she plays a doctor and she goes to Jamaica to treat a patient. And he's smug in that too, per usual, but you just love him. So yeah, first there's that. And also Harvey, who played George, I just realized, like, while I was watching it, he's in Two Evil Eyes in the segment The Black Cat. And man, is he once again, he knows how to get to that tension, like that creepy, like I'm scared. I was scared for
Yes. Yes.
Natalie. But yeah, we talked about this movie beforehand, when we were deciding what's going to be our next like discussion, and I have never heard of this movie at all. And it seems like it's something that would have played on or aired on TV, like on cable and stuff. I'm pretty sure that it did, but I never came across it. But I really enjoyed it. It felt like a play in a way. So in general, we have mainly on screen, we'll get into it. Technically, throughout the whole movie, there's only five characters. It's so under the radar, because even when I was just looking up some reviews and stuff like that, it doesn't really have like a lot of reviews. I love the fact that there's like a really unique twist, but it's still like a classic, um, compelling whodunit thriller. You know what I mean? So it's just like there's a lot of stuff that's in there, and you hit it on the nail where it's like it is not afraid to go to that dark humor. There were times when I found myself laughing because I was uncomfortable. And
Yes.
we'll get into that because it's just like there's a one scene that made me laugh, and then I felt so bad after I laughed because oh no, But yeah, I love the opening of it. You see this couple, they really seem like they're into each other. Natalie seems like she's really in love with George, and George seems like he's in love with her. And they have an age difference, but they seem completely happy. And this movie did not go the way that I thought that it was going to go, and we'll talk about that because as we get more into it, but it was even better. I didn't even know where it was going, and then that ending, once again. So yeah, I agree with you as well when it's just like with Cameron Diaz, this is like obviously like one of her early roles. And I feel like she did such a great job because we were able to see her comedic timing, her getting like dramatic, like she's really authentic in this role. And I'm rooting for her, even though at one point I thought that it was her behind some stuff. And I'm like, but I was still rooting for her. But then with Harvey, he's unpredictable. Like he's unpredictable all the time. And then kind of like even what you said when it comes to Craig Schaefer's character, Lance, he's charming, but there's something there. Every single time he's looking at them when they're kissing, and it's like, oh, you wish that was you, type of thing. And Billy Zane, wow, there's something about him with the water when he just becomes kind of like an a-hole. There's this movie, there's Titanic, there's Dead Calm. This is like more of a tame type of thing, but yeah, keep him away from the water. Yeah,
It's so
he's
true.
great.
So true.
Yeah, he's great in this as well, even though in a way we don't get to see too much of it, but we do because it kind of just this is like the starter point. But yeah, I love the fact that this movie it blends different genres. I think at first as the viewer, because this is what I was expecting, I was just expecting just a straight thriller. But then
Yeah.
there was some humor. And then I feel like with the intensity of these scenes and the humor, like the dark humor, it just made it hit even harder. And it felt like they still kept the mystery going because kind of you said, even with this, Natalie's trying to handle one thing and then something else happens. And then like I was just like at this point, what is she gonna she's gonna have to move and change her name to Gladys. Like just change your whole identity. But yeah, it's just a really nice balance between suspense and even character development, which again, I just wasn't expecting. I was just expecting like a full-on thriller. It's just really an enjoyable ride, just being able to see what's going on. And then you feel invested with these characters. Like I was so invested with their fates, you know? So there's that. And but yeah, I definitely feel like this is a hidden gem. Like you said, it's quirky, it's tense, it has dark humor. Cameron Diaz like is incredible. Like everyone's incredible, but she's incredible, like you said, where it's like you can tell that yeah, she's gonna have like a fantastic big career. And but yeah, if you're someone who loves suspenseful thrillers with some dark humor, who done it, this is a must watch.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it and agree completely. From here on out, everybody, spoilers, spoilers. You've been warned, so we can get into the movie. Spoilers, spoilers. I love Dead Calm, and you're right.
Yes.
Billy Zane needs to stay away from the water.
Either
Uh,
way.
and just to give a, so that we could get into the performances and our scenes, essentially you have Nathalie and George, this sort of May December romance. He's a middle-aged man. She's a younger, beautiful woman. They're on this island, isolated, which I love the setting of because it really adds to the suspense of the movie. But while George and the island caretaker, Nathalie's best friend, are out on a boat ride together, Nathalie's ex-lover Kent comes in, and already you know that there's something going to go wrong here. But essentially, Kent dies. The movie is trying to one figure out exactly how he died, and second, what to do with his body because he's nude. This could be bad for George, who's a prominent judge, etc. So Nathalie and George's relationship is tested. Nathalie panics and hides his body in the cellar, in which George accidentally breaks Kent's neck. Therefore, they cannot go to the police, and Nathalie and George have to dispose of this body while not being caught by Lance or anyone else. So as we get into the performances, Cameron Diaz as Nathalie, star quality. I don't know how anyone could have watched this and not known she was going to be a star. She had done The Mask by this time, and There's Something About Mary was right around the corner. But Head Above Water really, really showcases everything, and I mean like everything. I think that is special about a Cameron Diaz movie. It has her comedic flair, her charisma, but also her strength, her dramatic style. You believe that Nathalie is this young woman who did have a troubled past and has made a choice to marry George for security, but I do think she actually loves him and she wants to make it work, and she can make it work if she stays away from all these other distractions. Unfortunately, once Ken shows up, her frantic performance shows how easily someone seemingly together can fall apart. Even as she falls apart, though, she's always thinking, always planning, never giving up. And I think she has a great chemistry with each one of the male actors, and the leaning on George, but then the sort of squabbling back with him, the flirtatious hesitation with Billy Zane, her familiarity with Craig Sheffer. I think, she really manages to engage each one of them, but stays to herself special. And I really like that about Cameron Diaz in general.
Yeah.
Harvey Keitel is George. I think you can believe that a girl that was as lost as Nathalie could end up with a man like George for a need of security. But I also can believe that Harvey Keitel can pull it off as handsome enough that she would genuinely love him and his personality and what he can offer. He's also incredibly controlling, though, and can act like her father more than her husband, which makes sense due to the age difference
Mhm.
and the fact that he's a judge. He's probably used to being kind of controlling. It does make me like sick to my stomach when I see him like controlling Nathalie in certain ways. Like I think you kind of said there are times you see Lance giving these looks. Sometimes it's out of jealousy. Sometimes I think it's out of concern. Like, what's
Mhm.
this relationship? And again, like I said, that's being part of a judge, being part of an older man who probably has an idea that Nathalie didn't just marry him for his looks. He probably has his own insecurities, but he gives a great delivery in all the scenes where like George lists like the possible headlines. I always enjoy his delivery, like jealous judge breaks when new lovers neck manslaughter charges. He's always kind of making these jokes throughout that Harvey Keitel really pulls off well. And at the same time, you believe him in a way that it gives a reasonable motivation as to why they keep going forward with these plans instead of just not going to the police.
Yeah.
Billy Zane is Kent. I think, like I said before, super charming. But I also, it also seems like he's the type of guy that would know how to push like an ex-lover's buttons. He could be a bad influence. Billy Zane is not in the movie much at all. Like we said, he gets to the island. He has sort of like a questionable night with Nathalie, although I believe her when she says nothing happened. But then, he dies the next morning. So he's not in it a lot, but you need an actor like Billy Zane who can show the audience exactly who Kent is, who Nathalie probably was with Kent, and to understand why he would be so much trouble if his character hadn't died, let alone now that he has died. And Craig Sheffer as Lance, his role needs that sort of brotherly friend from childhood quality, and Craig does that, but there's also a darker element right under the surface, as
Mhm.
it turns out that he is in love with Nathalie. And
Yeah.
he does have a dark side, which we see later when he's the one that, so Ken had sent a postcard that was supposed to let them know he was coming. We find out Lance is the one that hit it, which is essentially what set everything in motion. So you almost for a chunk of the movie keep hoping that he might end up being the hero, and I like that they make you think that there might be that chance, but that they like a chance between him and Nathalie. But I really like that the movie never actually goes there. Like Nathalie never is like for a second falling. She kisses him at one point, but to distract him, not to like
Yeah.
start something with him. And the movie never actually goes there, and I'm glad they don't because Lance can be frustrating. Like you see him putting these clues together, but he still doesn't quite believe Nathalie until it's too late. Like
Mm-hmm.
he does believe George, which is sucks. And
Yeah.
I can understand from his perspective that he knows her backstory and that she had a lot of troubles, and I'm sure he's thinking about that. But it is sort of like, come on, Lance, like you got to know, you got to trust Nathalie. If you really loved her, you would trust her in all
Mhm.
this. But what did you think of the overall performances?
Yeah, I feel like everyone did a great job, just kind of mimicking you, starting with Cameron Diaz as Natalie. I really, really like her character a lot. Like, I love how resourceful she is, and she's very clever, and she just has like a sense of she knows what's right and she knows what's wrong. And so even when after she placed Kent, I was going to call him Lance, but after she placed Clint in the cellar, she was clearly just on edge. Like that was a panic, you know what I mean? Her getting rid of all her things, but then it's just like, you know what? This is my husband. This is George. She could tell him. So she told him, and she told him pretty fast. Like I didn't think that that was going to happen that fast, So that was another surprise when I was just saying with this earlier. This movie went in directions I didn't even think it would go. With the character George, like you said, I feel like he's very controlling when it comes to her in a protective sense, but then also in a way where it's like, okay, I do believe that his character could definitely pull like a younger woman. Like he just seems very charming. He knows how to cut something on. However, I do think that it makes me wonder even how they even met, since she even had like these issues or these previously issues. So it's like, okay, you want somebody that you can control type of thing. And she was kind of lost, I'm sure. And so even when I love the kind of like what you said when she would go right back, kind of battling with him. But in some ways it's kind of like, okay, she is an ordinary young woman who's kind of naive. Because even before that, it's just kind of like for sure, she probably didn't, she knew that that's what he was doing, controlling her in some kind of sense. But it's like, man, look at this, like just to cover up this stuff and what he was willing to do, you know? So that's like the first thing. Then another thing is, as far as it goes with the character George, again, like it just seemed like he kind of put his career at the forefront, which in some ways I get, but it's like I really do feel like they could have went to the police. I mean, even though he did stomp on, that's the scene that made me like, oh, when he
Yes,
did that,
yes.
because you can hear like the crack, and it's like, yeah, we knew he was dead, but now he's like really dead now because you like broke his neck. So there's that. But yeah, I do think that they could have went to the police because he has like such a high career. It was an accident, type of thing. And then, okay, with the character Lance, again, he's charming, but there's something about him. You know what I mean? Where it was just like, what is that? Why did you take that postcard? Was he the one that switched the bottles? You know what I mean? There's so much stuff where it's like I had to go back and rewatch that part because like, oh my God, was it him? And like you said, I thought that he was going to be the hero, and how fast he just took George's side against when you know Natalie longer. But I'm guessing just because he saw the bottle, he knew that the guy was coming, and they were acting together, they were acting weird, but I'm still thinking that you would believe Nathalie over, George, but sure. And then as far as it goes with the character Kent, even though we didn't see too much of him, he still had a very strong presence. Minus him just being like a dead body and stuff like that, he had a strong presence. You can tell, like, yeah, they had like a really fun relationship, and he probably was expecting to get lucky that night. You know what I mean? Especially because George is away. Nathalie will most likely fall back in her bad habits, which I love the fact that she didn't. I believe her that nothing happened at all because even when she did have the opportunity to take that before she left, she didn't. You know what I mean? So I feel like that kind of speaks, volumes with some stuff. But yeah. And then the policeman at the end, we don't poor guy. But yeah, like all the characters they just have like a purpose. Everyone seems to have like a dark side. Mine is Nathalie, if I'm being honest with you. I'm not saying that she's perfect, but I don't see a dark side. I think that she panicked in the beginning by getting rid of Kent's clothes and all that other stuff. But again, I just feel like because she knows like right from wrong, I just feel like her morals was just kind of tested around that time. But she ultimately did the right thing. And then even at the end, she was still trying to do the right thing. Even with George, she was trying to do the right thing. So she's a very likable character.
Well, I'll piggyback onto that to say, because I agree that you said she's kind of a naive character, and I agree to the extent that I think she's naive, that she thinks she's had this troubled past. So I think from her perspective, she's being naive in thinking that in order to not get in trouble, she's going to put herself in the hands of a
Hmm.
man that's not going to get her into trouble. And that's one of the appealing things of George. So I don't think it's just like money security
Right.
and or, you know, that he's a judge. I think that because he's a judge, she thinks, well, I get myself into these situations, whatever they were. We never quite figure out what her past was. But like I think she thought naively giving herself over to somebody else to take control would keep her from getting in trouble, but that's not how you kind of grow. You
Right.
have to get yourself out of trouble. And so I
Hmm.
think the whole movie becomes this testament of Nathalie no longer being naive by the end, but she does have a good heart. She is, even when these different men are coming at her one way or another, she still cares about each and every one of them in a
Yeah.
different way. And she is naive, but I also think it's naive from a perspective of like thinking that be who you are with Kent wasn't working, so maybe who you are with George will help you. No, you have to help yourself, and I think that's kind of goes. But as we jump into our favorite scenes, moments, I love the interaction and chemistry between Cameron Diaz and Billy Zane during their scenes together. Like the whole, it's like two real scenes back to back, and Billy Zane isn't here long, but I get the impression that the two actors just had a lot of fun with their scene.
Yeah.
And so it makes me happy to see it. There's nothing like profound about that scene, their scenes, but that little section of the movie, I feel like I'm watching two people have a good time and I love it. And it's terrible, but yes, one of my favorite scenes and that I horrifyingly crack up at is the moments when Kent's body is like not all the way in the cellar. So Kent dies. Nathalie puts him in the cellar, but she can't get him down all the way. And George and Lance return from their little trip, and George keeps like stepping on it, and you know what's
And
happening underneath the
creaking.
crack of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's obviously a plot point as to why they can't just go to the police or a contributing factor, but I just love that scene. It's a really funny little moment that's twisted, and yeah, you're like laughing horrifyingly. Now, the whole sequence where Nathalie and George are carrying the body to the water, but then Lance shows up and they have to try and get the body into the water without
Yeah.
letting Lance know. I think, well, I love watching that scene. Again, I love every scene pretty much in this movie, but I really wanted to note that scene because I think it's the scene that really sums up the energy of Head Above Water, meaning like it's shocking, horrifyingly funny, it generates the will they, won't they get away with this suspense, etc. It's the married couple that has to think on the fly while distracting Lance, while trying to get rid of the body. I just think it's a really good scene from that perspective of it really, the one scene that represents the entire movie, I think is, carrying the body to try and throw it into the water. From a horror movie fan, when George chainsaws up Kent's body just as Nathalie finds the suit, because then they could have been okay. It's like they keep getting to a point of like if one or the other had just waited like another couple minutes, like again at
Hmm.
the beginning, if Nathalie had just left Kent in the bed, it probably would have worked out. But she saw Lance in panic probably or something. Well,
Yeah.
in this scene, they find the clothes. If George had just waited and not chainsawed up the body, now they would have been able to go to the police, at least based on George's thesis of everything.
Hmm.
So, and what I love about it is just it shows you now, okay, how far George is willing to go. And you see that madness is now definitely creeping in, and Nathalie is now in a different kind of trouble. And
Yeah.
I love that her first instinct is to get the heck away from him. And from this point on, they are really not a team anymore. They are no longer a married couple trying to work together. A line is starting to be drawn in the sand between them and how they want to handle it. And the trust is gone. They are now spying on each other, hiding things
Hmm.
from each other, and there's no turning back. So I just think that's a really great moment, scene from a horror movie standpoint.
Yeah.
Um, and then again, here's where the suspense kicks up. George, my other favorite, is just like George locks her down in the cellar because she thinks she will run away, which she will. She does. But I like that Nathalie is playing things intelligently. I do believe that there was a part of her that still at this point wants things to work with George,
Hmm.
or at least she doesn't want to let go of like what she thought it was going to be. He scared her in the water when she accused him of seeing the postcard and putting methanol in the vodka bottle, because George does have those quirks of like, that's also how they got in trouble. He puts like eggs in cigar boxes or whatever it is and methanol in vodka
Yeah.
bottles that are like put outside. For a moment, there's this moment by the firelight that like you think maybe they could get through this, but then you see him and he's just very quietly and sinisterly is like, time to go down in the cellar. And Nathalie knows that George has lost it. So she has to escape again. And I love that she always takes every opportunity to do that. And this is
Mhm.
a great scene because then it leads to the boat scene where she's trying to escape, but it's what makes Headed Above Water, the setting of it, so perfect because they are on this island. So it is harder to get away, let alone get to the police. I love that she always fights back. Like, again, they squabble, whatever. She kind of always like would let George kind of talk to her, however, but when it comes to shove, she pushes back and she whacks him over the head with an oar. He stops her, but not before she gets him with that. And then, of course, he like ties her up on the couch. He's super creepy the next morning with Lance, like
Mhm.
playing this creepy, everything's okay. Nathalie, as you know, she's like tied up in the living room. And, he's, of course, preparing to gaslight Nathalie so that nobody will believe anything she says. And we'll jump over to you, but the last thing of like all the scenes at Lance's house, because I think this movie constantly, one thing I love about it is it does constantly give you hope after hope that like this is going to be Nathalie's way out. Oh, this is going to be Nathalie's
Mhm.
way out. And this time with Atlantis, you're like, okay, now she will be rescued. But nope, not yet. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that it's not ever Nathalie getting rescued. It ultimately will be up to Nathalie to save herself.
Yeah.
Because Lance totally betrays Nathalie.
Mhm.
I think it's out of gaslit concern, but then he
Mhm.
does offer to look at the steps, like he promised, because he was like, they kind of tie Nathalie down, and but he did promise to check it out. So you're glad that
Yeah.
he's going to, but it is a funny moment in there where like George is like tying her up and out of habit he starts to gag her again, and Lance is even like, wait a minute, we don't need to do that,
Yeah.
right? Like that's weird. And I think it's one of the things that finally gets him to like something's not right
Mhm.
here on George's end. But he does have the postcard, Lance, which is revealed in this. And I think that he was trying to break up George and Nathalie. I don't know that he has any evil intent, or I don't know, maybe he did. I always go back and forth with it. Like, whatever he was planning, I think that he definitely was always in love with Nathalie,
Mhm.
and he set everything in motion, as in Kent did arrive, and it did ruin George and Nathalie's relationship, but things turned out differently than Lance expected, especially for Lance. Last thing is just before we get in the ending, one of the things I love of all the scenes is that it just showcases how people will act and people act differently in stressful situations. You realize that George was probably always a ticking time bomb underneath.
Mhm.
Nathalie was always in danger then. And I love that this movie, it tells all this though with a lighter tone, but yet there's some really darkness here, some
Yeah.
danger that is true to life with like no matter how well you know someone, you don't know how they're going to act in an extreme situation.
Right. Well, okay, first, I really do love the opening. I love the fact that it's like this coastal kind of like town type of thing. You know what I mean? They're in the middle of nowhere. It's very beautiful. I don't know if I would want to live someplace out there or even just even vacation, just because, we watch a lot of horror movies and thriller movies. So I just don't know about that, but it's very beautiful. So I do love that, opening and stuff because it looks very beautiful and peaceful and things just heat up super fast, so it's not peaceful at all. Then another thing I really loved, and you mentioned it, I love the scene when Nathalie, she tries to take Kent's body and she hides it in like the cellar, and then once Lance and George come back and they're walking around and there's just like this creaking, that creaking on that particular part. I mean, she was thinking pretty fast, and you mentioned it before where it's like, man, maybe if she would have just left him in the bed, it kind of would have just worked out. Like, look, he passed out. I don't know what happened. But yes, it looked a little odd that he was butt naked, his butt cheeks are out. Like, how are you going to explain that? You know what I mean?
Yes,
So yeah, but things just happen so fast. So yeah, when George is walking by, not only just George, but Lance, they're both walking past it, and you hear that creaking, and every single time I'm like, because at first I'm thinking, well, maybe he's alive. Maybe for some reason he's just unconscious and his eyes are open. But now, yeah, he's like really dead, like kind of like what I said before. So that was like a great scene where it's like it's horrifying, but it is kind of funny because they just keep on walking on it. And it kind of felt like a play. Like once again, like there's like this secret that's going on. Then, okay, just kind of jumping past it, I also love that scene when George and Nathalie, they're carrying this heavy thing. But I love the scene where it's like Nathalie runs back to the boat so she can like stuff the body underneath the seat and make it look casual. And then she has to act like she wasn't just doing anything crazy. Like I'm pretty sure that she was sweating, but it's hot, so that's an
yeah,
excuse. And then just to keep Lance distracted, she kisses him and trying to play with him in the water. And then again, even George is using his cues like, oh, my back hurts. And they have to think of a whole new plan because, like, this point, I thought that they were going to kill Lance. Like, because at this point, it was like, okay, either they might as well because he knows too much,
right.
or they once again panic and things start ramping up in just a bizarre way of doing that. Then my other favorite scene is actually the ending. Well, going towards the end. So first part is where after we think that George is dead, because his eyes are open, just like how Kent's eyes were open. So we thought that he's dead, and so Nathalie, she helped Lance. He was shot kind of like in his shoulder arm area, so she helps him with that. And then even with that, throughout all the stuff that just happened, okay, her husband just died and now Lance is hitting on her. Like, come on.
Mm,
Can you not? Like, it's like, honestly, all the men are just terrible in this movie, like, minus the police officer?
yeah,
So there's that. So that was like a great scene, especially where it's just like she sees the postcard. And then that's when everything ties together, where it's like, oh my gosh, it was you. You knew. And it's like, oh, I forgot. How do you forget? You see her all the time. You're coming over for a barbecue. You were swimming in the lake with them. Like, you know what I mean? Or the ocean with them. It's like all this stuff that's just happening. So there's that. And then finally, the ending with what happens to George. I feel like honestly, out of everyone, he had it the worst. Like that was crazy because he saw it coming. And
yeah.
even if there was a way that he survived, he most likely drowned. I mean, if Nathalie would have went out the way that she would have, that would have been horrible. But I'm so glad that didn't play out that way because what are the odds? And again, she's very resourceful. She thinks on her toes. Even being able to pull up at that very moment to grab onto the boat when the police officer comes by. So yeah, those are like my favorite scenes that I can think of at the moment, but there's so many great ones. Like it's just all just it flows perfectly.
Yeah, I think it's really well crafted, and I think that there's really something to enjoy in each and every scene. And I do want to just add that I also think it seems like a play, and I really kind of love that aspect of it. But also, yeah, I think, I kind of said this, and you said it again, which I just want to emphasize. I never really quite know where I land with Lance in the end about what his
Mhm,
ultimate plan was. I do think that he took the postcard wanting to cause some sort of trouble with Nathalie and George so
mhm.
that he could maybe finally have his shot with Nathalie. But based on the nature of everybody else in this film, I think that there's a chance that he may have had something to do with possibly putting the methanol or making sure that if he knew Kent was going to be there and he must know Kent's habits too, that he would be drinking it, even if it didn't kill him because of the methanol, drinking on his heart condition,
Mhm.
knowing that something would happen here as long as it meant he could end up with Nathalie. But
Yeah.
I think that the ending is terrific. I love that ultimately you get to see who everyone really is. George is capable of terrible, terrible things. Nathalie is actually a survivor and a fighter, no matter what life throws at her or what trouble she gets into. You learn that Lance was in love with Nathalie, but not necessarily the nicest guy, especially when he sided with George. I guess Kent is the only one who was always clear about who he was.
Yeah.
So he had to go pretty quickly.
Hmm.
But so we get to this ending where it seems, Lance get George is taken out seemingly. Lance, you think for a second maybe something's going to happen with Nathalie and Lance until she confronts him about the postcard, but she goes running off. George is actually still alive, kills Lance, and it's a shocking another surprise because it does have a few jump moments where you're like, oh, what just happened now? And I love that the ending, he has her feet cemented and her hands tied, but she manages to get the upper hand. But this ending is already like representative of the rest of the movie because it's going to be this complex like series of obstacles. So George is ready to kill now Nathalie too, as he has already killed Lance. He
Hmm.
has her feet cemented, her hands tied. She manages to get the upper hand, yet is not out of the woods either. And George's like quirky habits, the methanol in the vodka bottle, etc., whatever each of them are is what ultimately kind of does him in the end. And like I said, I think it's a great ending because it does sum up the rest of the film. Like it's a fitting ending for this film, in terms of these complex domino effect scenarios the characters have been in throughout the entire movie based on a chain of events. Well, here we have a literal chainsaw and domino effect ending in which a chain of near miss events is how Nathalie will survive. It's like, okay, the rope is cut, but now we have to deal with the swinging chainsaw. Next up
Hmm.
are the cement blocks on her feet, dragging her underwater, and then the propellers of the boat are coming at her. So it really is like the whole rest of the movie summed up in this ending, which is this with this rapid fire series of circumstances and obstacles that Nathalie has to overcome. And I love that it kind of ends on this note that even though Nathalie has survived through all of this, she still is going to have a little bit more to go as the policeman is now drinking the like drugged water. So there's still more for Nathalie ahead, and she's not out of the woods yet. But you can end on that note because we know that she got through all of the rest of the movie. So she will definitely get through whatever disaster is next. And I love that it still ends on that sort of like wicked sense of humor of like, it's over, but it's not over. But do the math and you'll figure out that she'll be okay. But what are your final thoughts on the ending and how the movie wraps up and all that?
I think that it wraps up just kind of how it started when things got chaotic because it was still chaotic. And but like you said, it's not as bad at this point. You know what I mean? Just one more body. But I don't know. Hopefully she doesn't panic again, dumps his
Right.
body off.
Right.
Just go to the police station and say
Yes.
that, hey, my husband, he would do this, and she's not wrong. They'll do an autopsy, they'll check back at the house, they'll find all the bodies, and so it'll be fine. It just sounds extremely far-fetched. And like when she was explaining, and the police officer's just like, yeah, I'm still listening. It's like,
Yeah.
oh no, so but yeah, you just can't help but laugh because it's just a series of unfortunate events. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it made you it left you satisfied, but again, it's just like, okay, you've been through this before, do not do the same thing. So
Yes. Well,
very
and I think,
curious.
what I do like about it is that I do think she'll go to the police because even when they were at like the worst moments, Nathalie was still like, let's just go to the
Yeah.
police. Let's just go. So I
Yeah.
do think she will. But yeah, I think ultimately Head Above Water is not a horror movie. I think it, though, is for the horror fan that enjoys their comedy with a wicked sense of humor, charismatic performances, what's going to happen next suspense, and just overall a really fun roller coaster ride. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House. Are you a fan of Head Above Water? What is your favorite dark comedy movie? Are you a fan of Cameron Diaz? Thank you, Zena Dixon, as always, for joining us. You can find Zena over at realqueenofhorror.com, on YouTube under her Real Queen of Horror moniker, or over at Wicked Horror. And I'm Justin. You can also find me at Wicked Horror for Woman Pop Culture or on Twitter. Thank you, Zena, for giving Head Above Water a chance. I'm glad that you found the humor in it and had a nice little ride with it.
I really did. I'm so happy that I have this in my collection. Thank you for
Nice.
this beautiful copy. I can't wait to show people. Can I,
Yeah,
'cause I feel like this is going to be a crowd pleaser.
it is. It really does. I feel like every time I've shown it, people have enjoyed it, and they're like they always feel good afterwards. It just makes
Mhm.
you feel kind of good, I guess. So,
Yeah.
well, thanks everybody. Comment below. Let us know what you think, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.